We got a special Locked On crossover edition getting you ready for Oklahoma versus TCU at TCU. The Sooners heading to Fort Worth. We got Stephen Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs. I'm John Williams of Locked On Sooners to get you ready for Saturday's game. Stephen, the big question right now, both teams have brand new coaches heading into this matchup for the first time. What have things been like for Sonny Dykes and the Horned Frogs this season?
Well, I mean, so far so good. They're 3-0. Now, obviously, it's all games that I guess going into the season you feel like they should have won. I do think beating SMU in Dallas with some emotion behind that, Sonny Dykes going back to his old school, was significant. They took care of business in the non-conference schedule. It's interesting. I feel like both schools have kind of done a 180 from the previous regime as far as like what the team's identities are, kind of the personality of the coaches. Sonny Dykes is very laid back. I mean, he's really good and open with the media so far. That wasn't Gary Patterson's calling card. And he's also an offensive-minded head coach. And we've seen this offense take some strides. It hasn't always been super consistent, but they've scored, over 30 points in their first 3 games. There's been a lot of explosiveness. Even with Max Duggan playing quarterback, which wasn't planned going into the season. So, now you're going to hit the teeth of the schedule, and this is sort of where you see how much improvement this team's actually made. But I think overall, you couldn't really ask for a smoother start to the season. And, transitioning to OU, obviously going to a defensive mind like Brett Venables, really intense guy. How has that been so far for Sooners fans and for the players adjusting to a new head coach?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. He's actually been a little bit of the opposite of Lincoln Riley too, where he seems to be more kind of free and open with the media. He's more willing to talk about, the nitty gritty, get down into the details, the brass tacks, and at times can be a little bit long-winded in some of his replies, but I don't think anybody in the media is complaining about that. But yeah, going to the defensive side or a defensive focused head coach, it kind of changes the expectations a little bit. Even though we knew that there was going to be some amount of rebuild that was going to happen on the defensive side of the football because they lost 5 starters to the NFL, another starter transferred to Stanford as a grad transfer. I think people still expected it to be much better than what it was against Kansas State. And up until that point, it had been. They played really, really well against UTEP. I mean, there was a bit of a second quarter lull that happened there. Got off to a really good start defensively against Kent State, even though the offense kind of struggled out of the gate. And then against Nebraska, I mean, aside from that opening drive, they absolutely dominated the Cornhuskers in Lincoln. And so the early returns were really, really positive. And then Adrian Martinez just kind of blew the doors off of all that and kind of shredded a lot of the optimism and the goodwill that Brent Venables had built up through the first few weeks of the season. I think people are still very optimistic about what the future holds. I think people are, and myself included, we're kind of resetting expectations a little bit for how good this defense could be in year 1 of Brent Venables, because we're still working on establishing their identity, their culture, getting the right personnel in place to be able to play his defense. A lot of the things that happened on Saturday against Kansas State were not necessarily things that we'd seen. And Brent Venables mentioned that in his postgame, that they made a lot of mistakes that they hadn't seen up until that point. And so that was a bit of a surprise for them. You spoke about Max Duggan earlier, and to me, that's a huge storyline for this team. You said they weren't planning on starting him this season, but he's been really good. Brent Venables mentioned he's got one of the highest passing efficiencies in the country right now. He's completing 70-something% of his passes. I think it was 77 when I last looked. And his adjusted completion percentage is 87.9. So he's off to a really good start. What's been the difference for Max Duggan?
Well, I think honestly they've made things easier for him. Those numbers, he has been really efficient, and they focused on a lot of high percentage throws. The first few seasons when he was a starter, a lot of the throws they were asking him to make, fades down the sideline, a lot of deep shots, really trying to establish the run and then using that to have play action behind it. And the short and intermediate passing game was really non-existent. So they've kind of gotten back to that a little bit. They're spreading the ball around a lot. And I think the fascinating thing is I'm curious to see how it plays out this week, because you mentioned Adrian Martinez, and he did so much damage on the ground. And that's really been, like, when I think of Max Duggan's best games in his career, At least his first couple of years, it was doing a lot of damage with his legs, but he hasn't done that so far. Now, they've been playing Tarleton and SMU, so it's not really something you want to use if you don't have to. I'm curious to see if that is brought out more against Oklahoma, that quarterback run game, whether that's, scrambling or some design plays. But yeah, he's been fantastic. And on Tuesday, Sonny Dykes said that Chandler Morris was cleared to play, like he's available, but they're going to start Max Duggan and kind of let him ride out this hot hand and see how it goes. I think the team has kind of really rallied around him since he handled the quarterback battle so well in the offseason. And when he did lose his job, he stayed the course, even though he didn't have to wait that long. I mean, the second half of the first game, he was back out there. But he didn't pout. He didn't, have a bad moment, really. He just kind of went back to work and stayed with it. So, yeah, I feel like it's just a coaching staff that kind of understands his strengths and weaknesses and have made, a priority of trying to have him get the ball out quickly and spread it around to a lot of different guys with some high percentage throws. Go back to that loss for a second. What do you think the mentality of this team is now? Because I was joking around with one of my friends today, and I said, I really feel better about pulling off an upset if OU had dominated K-State and they're kind of flying high coming into this game with Red River coming up. But I imagine this sort of refocuses this team. So do you think this could end up being, maybe a good thing for Coach Venables and his staff as the season progresses from a long-term standpoint?
I always have a hard time counting a loss as a good thing.
Yeah.
At the same time, I will say the way that they lost might be something that does help refocus them, because it was a lot of just details, small things that they didn't play well in, and they just a lot of mental miscues. The defensive coordinator, Ted Roof, just talked about just simple alignment stuff and gap filling, not playing the scheme the way it was designed to be played, which led to a lot of that. Some of it was tackling issues, and some of it was Adrian Martinez. I mean, the dude just had a superhuman game against the Oklahoma Sooners. Now, we talked about it on our show, but it's one of those situations where you play bad defensively and the quarterback plays really, really well, and it just kind of makes for a really bad night all the way around. They had a hard time tackling him, and the thing that I kind of hold on to heading into TCU is that while Max Duggan is a really good runner, he's not necessarily the same physical player. Like, he's not going to blow through tackles in the same way. I mean, he's an athletic guy that can hurt you with his legs, but I don't think Oklahoma is going to be missing a bunch of tackles or having a bunch of, tackles broken by Max Duggan. I think this is going to help get them back to focusing on the fine-tuned things, not trying to overplay certain situations, not trying to be too perfect or make every play, but playing the scheme the way that it was meant to be played. And I mean, I think they're going to have to, because you talked about the short area passing game. If that's something that TCU rolls out against Oklahoma, I mean, that is going to be something that I think can give them trouble, because if you get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly and you're not allowing the pass rush to get to you, that can spell trouble for Oklahoma, because so much of their defense is predicated on getting pressure on the quarterback and creating sacks. And the way it sounds like, and what we've seen from Sonny Dykes early in this season, is that he was going to get the ball out of Max's hands quick and not allow him to throw it down the field where he hasn't been as accurate.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is going to be an interesting chess match for both these first-year head coaches on Saturday. We're going to talk matchups in a minute. Now, one website that has all the matchups that you can bet on is one of our great friends and great sponsors, BetOnline. The line for this game, this TCU Oklahoma game, if you're interested in placing some money on that, Sooners 6.5-point favorites going into Saturday. So if that piques your interest, jump on that, whether you think TCU can cover or you feel like Oklahoma bounces back and covers that spread in Fort Worth. But you're going to veg out and watch a lot of college football Saturday. You're probably going to watch a lot of NFL football on Sunday. So why not try to make some money? Like if your spouse is mad at you because you're watching so much TV, say, hey, listen, I'm trying to provide for our family. I've gone to BetOnline. I've placed some wagers down. I know what I'm doing. If you're into combat sports, you can do it there. BetOnline is also just a good source for your general sports news, injury updates, all those things. BetOnline, one-stop shop. You use the promo code LOCKEDON. Again, that's BetOnline, one of our fantastic sponsors. All right, this is our Locked On crossover. I'm Steven Simcox from Locked On Horned Frogs. Alongside me is John Williams from Locked On Sooners, and we are discussing this TCU Oklahoma game coming up this weekend. And John, you touched on some of those matchups in our last segment, but if you could narrow it down to one or two, whether it's individual or kind of position group battles that you're looking at that will tell the story of this game, what are your thoughts when you break down these rosters?
I mean, firstly, it's Quentin Johnston. I mean, this is a guy that went off against the Oklahoma Sooners last year. It was like 8 catches for 170 plus and 3 touchdowns, just had an absolutely monster game. And we haven't really seen Oklahoma's secondary tested in a big way. I mean, we've had, teams that have been able to complete some long passes, but it's usually to guys that you wouldn't think, just the random tight end. UTEP has a decent wide receiver core, Kent State as well, but nobody to the same skill level as Quentin Johnston, somebody who was an all Big 12 preseason selection and can really make you pay if you line them up in one-on-one coverage. So that's the first place that I look to that could really cause Oklahoma trouble if they're not careful. The second one is Kendre Miller. Out of the shadow of Zach Evans, it looks like he's putting together a really nice season to start. And I wouldn't say he's a Deuce Vaughn kind of player, but he's got the same like breakaway ability. And if you're not careful again in those situations, that he could really hurt you as a runner back. So the linebackers really need a bounce back game because they got abused by Adrian Martinez and Deuce Vaughn last week. And the mesh point is going to be so huge for how Oklahoma plays defensively. If they're not able to corral Max Duggan and Kendre Miller and play sound defensively in the read option game, then that could spell trouble for their defense.
Yeah, that would be a welcome sight for TCU fans if Quentin Johnston could get going this week. He hasn't really been used a whole lot through the first couple games of the season, but I think that will change as they get into Big 12 play.
They haven't needed him, right? Like,
yeah,
that's that's what I look at. It's like 9 catches, 77 yards. Like, you just haven't needed to throw to him.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't play a ton of snaps in that Tarleton game. And then SMU, they sort of got him involved later, but we'll see how that changes. I do feel like there'll be some more single coverage opportunities as they play better competition, and maybe some teams have a little more confidence in their corners moving forward. I'm going to stick with defense as well. And John, this is killing me. Last season, before the 2021 season, I was really, banging the drum saying, hey, this TCU cornerback room, you got a lot of vets there in the secondary. I think they're going to be really good. That didn't particularly pan out. Pretty much all those guys came back. And so this offseason, again, I was saying, hey, the secondary, they're going to be really good. And well, so far early in the season, that hasn't been the case. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson had some trouble with Rashee Rice, who, in fairness, is a really good wide receiver for SMU. I think he'll be an NFL player. And then Jake Bailey for SMU had over 130 yards and a touchdown in this matchup last week. So the passing game hurt them in really their first true test. Now you face Dillon Gabriel, Marvin Mims, Theo Weiss. Can these TCU corners be competitive? Can Kean Stewart and Josh Newton and Travius Hodges-Tomlinson sort of match up one-on-one? And then it's kind of twofold because they've transitioned now. Joe Gillespie, for Sooner fans that don't know, he was at Tulsa the last few seasons. He's now the TCU defensive coordinator, and he runs a 3-3-5, which is different than the 4-2-5 scheme that Gary Patterson used to run. And he doesn't bring a lot of blitzes, or he hasn't shown that yet. He's really relied on this defensive front to get pressure with the 3 guys they have. And it hasn't been super successful yet. So one, I'm just curious to see if we see some more twists and stunts and different looks in this game, but also, can those 3 defensive linemen find a way to wreak some havoc against this OU line and cause some pressure to make things more difficult for Dillon Gabriel. That'll be really, one of the true tests of the game, and in my mind. And John, before we kind of move on to our predictions, does this feel like a shootout to you? I mean, that seemed like both these teams, the offenses are kind of clicking, the defenses are sort of far behind. I know when we say that, usually it ends up being like 17-14, but the pace of this game feels like it's going to be pretty fast. At least that's what both teams I think want to do on paper.
Yeah, I feel really good about Oklahoma being able to score some points in this game. The big question mark to me is going to be how well they can slow down TCU's offense. TCU's got playmakers, and like you mentioned, they spread the ball around. So it's not like you can focus on one particular player. Even though a lot of attention is going to be given to Quentin Johnston, there's other guys that can make plays on this TCU offense. And so it does have the feeling of one of those games where you want to hit the over. If you're looking at BetOnline's odds over there and smash that, because this is going to probably be a high scoring game. After what I saw from the Oklahoma Sooners defense last week, I have a hard time, projecting them to hold TCU under 20 in this one, and who knows where it could go from there. But yeah, the pace that Oklahoma wants to play at lends itself to a lot of possessions for both teams. And so both teams are going to have quite a few opportunities to score a lot of points in this one.
Caleb Williams, we all know who he was, a highly rated guy. And you could see the talent there. How does Dylan Gabriel kind of compare from an arm talent perspective, and just how is he a different QB in the way he sort of approaches the game?
I think he's probably a little bit more kind of methodical. He's more of just kind of a tactician a little bit. He's got the athleticism to beat you with his legs, and I think he's more accurate. But again, we saw such a short stint of Caleb Williams that it's hard to know exactly like what his trajectory is, because he looks great for USC right now.
Yeah.
I don't think we saw necessarily the finished product with Caleb Williams last year. I think everybody kind of knows what Dylan Gabriel is at this point. He's a highly efficient passer. He's got an accurate deep ball, although he missed, one last week. From what I've seen, just the first 4 games of the season, is that he's got some really good talent. He's been really good for the Oklahoma Sooners. I don't think he's ascended to like great yet. He has some really great throws, like a couple deep balls last week, one to Marvin Mims, one to Theo Weiss, which were on the money. And then he misses Drake Stoops wide open on a couple passes where, he'd like those back. I think the leadership aspect it seems like he's a guy that's out front and someone who is leading by example, and he's kind of putting the team first. Not to say that Caleb Williams wasn't, but I think there was just a bit of a different vibe between Dylan Gabriel and then both quarterbacks that we had last year, and Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler, and that he's just a little bit more unassuming of a guy. He's got some issues with getting, balls batted down at the line of scrimmage at times. He's definitely, throw one errant on you but he hasn't had any turnover worthy plays, not any near, interceptions, not any near fumbles. So he's been really good at protecting the football, which Spencer Rattler wasn't able to do last year. Caleb Williams is a little bit better than that. So we haven't had the amazing kind of level of play that Caleb Williams provided, but we also didn't have like the low level of play like against Iowa State or Baylor last year that Caleb Williams also had. So I'd say he's been good. I keep grading him at about a B or B plus in his performances. Even last week, even though he missed a couple throws, he was really good. He was what gave you a chance to stay in that game, even though the defense, really didn't hold up there into the bargain. So that's kind of where I'd put him. It's hard to know where we're at still, because, Kansas State's defense is pretty good, but I felt like the offense could have been better. Going into this week against TCU, I don't know if we'll still get a great litmus test for what this offense can be, just based on what we've seen from TCU so far this season. So that's kind of where I'd put Dylan Gabriel. I think he's good. I don't know how good he is just yet. I still got some questions to answer on that front. But for TCU, big question mark being kind of the defense. You kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. What are they going to have to do to kind of slow down Oklahoma's offense, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it really does start with limiting that passing game, but obviously Eric Gray is a great weapon as well, and they're going to try to take advantage of that. The linebacking play has been pretty solid for TCU. Their front 7 has been, I would say, decent to good all year. There's a true freshman in the middle at nose tackle, Dominic Williams, who has played above his age the first couple games of the season. So can he hold his own? These edge rushers, Dylan Horton, can he get to the quarterback? And then Joe Gillespie's defense is very different. Like Gary Patterson was so aggressive. They're always trying to force negative plays, trying to force turnovers, trying to put teams behind the sticks. And this is really a defense that is more predicated on, we're going to sit back. We're going to allow teams to, have some plays, have some yardage, but we toughen up when we get near the scoring zone. Can you put together a 10 or 11 play drive? But I feel like there's going to be some splash plays made by this defense. Josh Newton had an interception last week. Can somebody force a pick? Can somebody create a turnover, force a fumble to give the offense more opportunities? Because while the offense has been explosive, it hasn't been super consistent. And if you have a few empty possessions against this Oklahoma team, then you can find yourself, in a deficit in a hurry. So I think those will be, the big keys. And then again, on the outside, trying to limit those playmakers. But it seems like Jeff Lebby has this offense cooking early again. They haven't really taken a huge step back. So I would imagine that if TCU is going to win this game, it's going to be because they score efficiently and then, defensively, maybe force a few turnovers or get some big stops when they have to. We'll take one more break here, but everybody listen to us here. Get on the Locked On Sooners YouTube page. Get on the Locked On Horned Frogs YouTube page. Put in the comments what your predictions are for Saturday, and then we'll come back, and John and I will predict the game on Saturday and what we think is going to happen. This is coming up on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, John, final segment. I'll go to you first here. OU coming off a loss. K-State game at home. That didn't go great, but now refocusing, coming into Fort Worth to take on TCU. What do you think is going to happen? Who do you think wins this football game on Saturday?
So I'm kind of envisioning a close game. Oklahoma struggled to get out of the gates quickly offensively. They've had some slow starts, especially last week against Kansas State. I'm trying to just erase that game from my memory banks as much as possible. And so I do think they get off to a little bit better start this week, but I think, TCU has enough weapons offensively to kind of hang in there against Oklahoma's defense and put up some points. And so I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a high scoring game. I'm not going to be predicting something like what happened in Dallas. That was, 42-34 was the score last week.
Yeah.
I don't think we get to that point, but I do think it is going to be a high scoring game. I'm kind of looking at something like 38-31. I think it's going to be a close kind of a one possession game throughout, kind of back and forth. Oklahoma might get up by 2 scores at some point, but TCU will kind of hang in there and stay the course. But that's kind of where I'm landing right now, 38-31. A lot of it to me is just going to depend on how quickly Oklahoma gets out of the gate. If they have a sluggish start to this game, it could play right into TCU's hands. You talked about, forcing Oklahoma to go, or forcing opponents to go on long drives. Well, Oklahoma hasn't consistently been able to do that this year. They've had a lot of big plays, but if the big play hasn't been there, especially last week against Kansas State, if the big play wasn't there, it was hard for them to get any momentum going. And a lot of times they killed themselves with penalties and untimely sacks and, missed throw here and there. And so I think, to me, that's the big issue is if Oklahoma can get out fast, if they can avoid some of the mental miscues offensively, they're going to put up enough points to make this, to pick up the win in this one. But I do think TCU keeps it close in this game.
Yeah, so I said this earlier in the week. I know this kind of sounds like a defeatist attitude, but I really feel like it's interesting. OU has been the one opponent since TCU's joined the Big 12 that they just simply haven't really competed against. They're 1-10. There's some close matchups early in the series, but then the last 4 or 5 years, aside from that game in Norman where they were able to turn Jalen Hurts over like 4 or 5 times, it seemed like these spreads have been pretty big. So I think just playing competitive against OU would be a nice step forward for this team and this program. And I think they'll do that on Saturday. I feel like they're scoring enough on offense. They've made enough adjustments on defense. The team morale is pretty high. I could see them getting off to a nice start. Just feeling good about where they are right now. I think eventually Oklahoma finds ways to put some drives together, get some big plays, and wins the football game. One thing I am interested to see, we talked about both teams playing fast, and I believe that's what they want to do. I do wonder if because of, the explosiveness that OU has, if we see TCU kind of slow the pace down, or at least try to play a little ball control, run the football. I think in the end, I like your idea. I'm not sure it gets in the 40s. I'll say OU 31-24 over TCU. Maybe it doesn't always feel that close, but for the most part, it's a competitive game. And then, we'll see where both teams go from here. But, John, if our TCU faithful out here, if they want to know more about the Sooners, before Saturday's game, they want to check out some more content from you and your co-host, where can they find Locked On Sooners?
Yeah, so you can find Locked On Sooners anywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. You can follow my co-host Josh Helmer at Josh on Ref. I'm at John 9 Williams. And you can also read some of my work covering the Sooners over at thesoonerswire.com as well. So excited to get on the field again. Try to get rid of Kansas State, try to get rid of the David Hicks last minute loss on the recruiting trail. It's been a bad 5 days for Oklahoma faithful, both on and off the field. Although I will say, like, generally in the past, when we mentioned off the field, it's because somebody got arrested or, convicted of assault or something like that. So I'm just glad we're just a couple more days away from game day. We can start focusing on TCU.
And for my TCU folks, John's also a really good Cowboys follow on Twitter. If you like me and like him are a frustrated Cowboys fan, then you can follow him. Even though, hey, Cooper Rush, what a nice surprise. 3-0 starting QB. Getting it done.
That game was that was something else, man.
It was. CeeDee Lamb, look at that. OU connection, having a fantastic game after that drop pass early.
I was so mad at him after that. I never trashed CD on Twitter, but I was like, okay, I'm football mad now.
I was too. When he made it up, I'd have been out of my fantasy team, and I needed significant points because Saquon was on the other team. Mm-hmm. And anyway, it all worked out in the end. Yeah, but I was not happy for a while in that one. You can find me at Simcox Steven. The show is Locked On Horned Frogs, wherever you get your podcast. We're also on YouTube. And the show is at Locked On TCU on Twitter. If you want to follow, I'm not as active on the show account, but if you want to follow it, that'd be fantastic. I'm Steven Simcox. That's John Williams. Sooner fans, Horned Frog fans, enjoy the game Saturday. And thanks so much for tuning in to this Locked On crossover. We'll both be back tomorrow. It's your team every day.